My name is Lottie, and at 61 years old, I never imagined I'd become the mother who crashed her own son's wedding. I raised Michael alone after losing my husband when our boy was just 7, sacrificing everything to give him a good life. When he introduced me to Cassandra, something felt off despite her dazzling smile. Then came the crushing blow. She banned me from their wedding after I discovered her secret. I couldn't let my son marry a woman who was already married to someone else. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button and settle in for a story about a mother's love, a terrible deception, and the lengths I went to save my son. I still remember the day Thomas died like it was yesterday. We were an ordinary family living in our modest home in Glastonbury, Connecticut. Thomas worked as an electrical engineer while I taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy with our simple life and our energetic 7-year-old son, Michael. That fateful morning in 1989, Thomas kissed me goodbye, as he always did before heading to work. He called during his lunch break to tell me he wasn't feeling well and was coming home early. By the time I got home from school with Michael, I found Thomas collapsed in our driveway. The paramedics tried everything, but a massive heart attack took him at just 38 years old. The following weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, consoling Michael, and trying to make sense of our new reality. I remember sitting at our kitchen table late at night, bills spread before me, realizing Thomas's life insurance would only carry us for a few months. Our savings were modest, and suddenly I was solely responsible for raising our son and keeping a roof over our heads. I had to make difficult decisions quickly. I sold our family home and moved us into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment closer to my parents. I continued teaching during the day, but also took on evening work at a local bookstore to make ends meet. My parents helped with Michael when they could, but they were aging themselves and had limited energy. "Mom, when is Dad coming back?" Michael would ask in those early months, his innocent face unable to fully grasp the permanence of death. Those moments broke my heart repeatedly, but they also strengthened my resolve to create stability in his life, despite our loss. I made sure Michael's routine stayed as consistent as possible. I attended every parent-teacher conference, helped with homework between my jobs, and never missed his Little League games, even when exhaustion pulled at every fiber of my being. On particularly difficult days, I'd take Michael to the cemetery, and we'd tell Thomas about our week, keeping him present in our lives in whatever way we could. As the years passed, Michael grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy. He inherited his father's analytical mind and natural aptitude for mathematics and science. By middle school, his teachers were recommending advanced classes, and I scrimped and saved to provide him with the educational resources he needed to thrive. The other single mothers in our neighborhood became my lifeline during those years. We formed an unofficial support group, trading childcare duties and offering shoulders to cry on during the inevitable challenges of solo parenting. Sarah, Linda, and Diane became the sisters I never had, and together we navigated the choppy waters of raising children on our own. High school brought new challenges, as Michael excelled academically but struggled socially. Being without a father figure affected him more as a teenager, and there were nights he'd rage against the unfairness of it all. Those were the moments when I questioned if I was enough, if I was failing him somehow, by not being able to fill the void Thomas left behind. "I miss him too," I would tell Michael during those difficult conversations, "but your father would be so proud of the young man you're becoming." I took on additional tutoring jobs to save for Michael's college education. While I encouraged him to apply for scholarships, I was determined he wouldn't start adult life burdened with excessive student loans, as so many of his peers would. My proudest moment came when Michael received his acceptance letter to MIT with a partial scholarship. The years of sacrifice, the long hours working multiple jobs, the postponed dreams of my own, all of it felt worthwhile, seeing the joy on his face as he read that letter aloud in our small kitchen. College was financially challenging, despite the scholarship, but Michael worked part-time in the university's computer lab and graduated with honors in computer engineering. When he secured a position at a prestigious tech company in Boston, with a starting salary that made my eyes widen, I felt a sense of accomplishment that's difficult to put into words. While Michael built his career, I finally had time to rebuild my own life. I retired from teaching after 30 years, joined a book club, took up gardening, and even dated occasionally, though none of the relationships progressed to anything serious. My friends often asked if I regretted not remarrying, but truthfully, my life felt full. Michael called regularly, visited when he could, and my circle of friends provided the companionship I needed. Through all the hardships and triumphs, I maintained hope that someday Michael would find someone special, someone who would love him with the same devotion Thomas had shown me, someone worthy of the remarkable man he had become despite the adversity he'd faced. Little did I know that when that day seemingly arrived, it would lead to one of the most painful chapters of our lives. The excited phone call came on a Sunday evening in April 2023. Michael's voice bubbled with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in years as he told me about a woman named Cassandra, whom he'd met at a charity gala benefiting children's cancer research. "Mom, she's incredible," he gushed. "She works in art acquisition for private collectors, knows everything about modern art, and you should see her. She's beautiful." I smiled at his excitement, remembering the flutter of first attraction from my own youth. Michael had dated throughout college and his 20s, but had always been cautious about getting serious. His career had taken priority, and at 34, he'd had several relationships, but nothing that lasted beyond a year or two. "Tell me more about her," I encouraged, genuinely happy to hear this joy in his voice. "She's 32, grew up in California, went to school on the East Coast. She's traveled everywhere, Mom. Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, all for her work finding rare pieces for her clients. And she's so easy to talk to. We ended up chatting until the venue staff started cleaning up around us." Over the following weeks, Cassandra was all Michael could talk about. Their relationship progressed quickly, with Michael mentioning weekend trips to New York for Broadway shows and dinners at restaurants that required reservations months in advance. I was thrilled for him, but also slightly concerned by how fast things were moving. A month into their relationship, Michael arranged for us to meet over dinner at an upscale Boston restaurant. I drove the 2 hours from Connecticut, nervously anticipating this introduction. I wanted so badly to like this woman who had captured my son's heart. Cassandra arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that turned heads throughout the restaurant. She was stunning, tall and slender, with glossy dark hair and confident posture. She wore a black cocktail dress that looked deceptively simple until you noticed the designer label complemented by a diamond tennis bracelet and earrings that caught the light with every movement. "You must be Lottie," she said, her voice warm as she extended her hand. "Michael has told me so much about you." Throughout dinner, Cassandra was charming and attentive, asking about my teaching career and my life in Connecticut. But I noticed something that Michael, blinded by infatuation, did not. Whenever the conversation turned to her background or family, Cassandra would provide vague answers before skillfully redirecting the discussion. "My parents weren't really in the picture," she said dismissively when I asked about her family. "But enough about my boring childhood. Michael tells me you were an amazing single mom. That must have been so difficult." When I asked where she had studied art, she mentioned a small college in Massachusetts, before asking about Michael's experience at MIT. When I inquired about previous relationships, she laughed lightly and said, "Nothing worth mentioning," before complimenting my necklace and asking its origin. What stood out most, however, was how Cassandra's eyes lit up when Michael mentioned his recent promotion or the company stock options that were vesting soon. She asked surprisingly detailed questions about his financial prospects, thinly veiled as interest in his career. "You must be so proud that your investment strategies are paying off," she said, touching his arm affectionately. "That waterfront property in Cambridge you've been eyeing might be within reach sooner than you thought." This was news to me. Michael hadn't mentioned any property interests during our regular calls. I realized with a pang that there were aspects of his life he was now sharing with Cassandra first. Over the following months, I watched as Cassandra gradually monopolized more of Michael's time. Our Sunday evening calls became less consistent. When I visited Boston, Cassandra always seemed to have planned events that left little time for just Michael and me to talk. When I invited them to Connecticut, there was always a reason they couldn't make it: a gallery opening, a client emergency, a weekend trip already booked. Michael's social media, once filled with friends and colleagues, now featured primarily Cassandra and the glamorous life they were building together. Photos showed them at exclusive restaurants, at gallery openings, on weekend getaways to coastal towns. In every image, Cassandra was impeccably styled, often wearing different expensive jewelry pieces that seemed excessive for someone who supposedly worked on commission. "Don't you think things are moving a bit fast?" I cautiously asked Michael during a rare moment alone, when he helped me carry groceries during a brief visit to my home. "When you know, Mom," he replied with the certainty of the newly in love. "Dad proposed to you after 6 months, remember?" I didn't have the heart to tell him that Thomas and I had known each other since high school, before we started dating in college, a far cry from meeting a virtual stranger and becoming inseparable within weeks. Just shy of 6 months after they met, Michael called me on a Tuesday night, his voice trembling with excitement. "Mom, she said yes, we're engaged." Despite my reservations, I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "Oh, Michael, that's wonderful news. Congratulations to both of you." As he shared details about the proposal, a private yacht in Boston Harbor, a custom-designed ring from a high-end jeweler, I felt a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. Something about Cassandra and this whirlwind romance felt wrong, but I had no concrete reason to object beyond a mother's intuition. And that I knew from experience with other parents of adult children was not enough to voice serious concerns without damaging my relationship with my son. The engagement party was Cassandra's vision brought to life, a catered affair at an upscale venue overlooking Boston Harbor that must have cost Michael a small fortune. Crystal champagne flutes, elaborate floral arrangements, and a photographer documenting every moment for what Cassandra called our society announcement. I wore my best dress, a navy blue cocktail number I'd purchased years ago for a colleague's retirement party. Next to Cassandra's friends in their designer clothes, I felt distinctly out of place. Michael introduced me proudly to everyone, but I noticed how Cassandra's smile tightened whenever he brought someone to meet my mom. "Isn't the ring just perfect?" Cassandra said repeatedly throughout the evening, extending her hand to showcase the enormous diamond that must have cost several months of Michael's salary. "Michael knows exactly what I deserve." I tried to mingle with Cassandra's friends, hoping to learn more about her. Most seemed to be recent acquaintances from the art world or social circles she joined since moving to Boston. When I asked one woman how long she'd known Cassandra, she vaguely mentioned meeting at a gallery opening a while back. Another referred to attending college with Cassandra, but became oddly evasive when I asked which one. "She's quite private about her past," the friend said, sipping her champagne. "Had a difficult childhood, you know. We don't bring it up." Toward the end of the evening, I excused myself to use the restroom. Taking a wrong turn in the unfamiliar venue, I found myself in a quiet hallway near the coat check. That's when I heard Cassandra's distinctive laugh, followed by her voice speaking in hushed, intimate tones. "I know, babe. I miss you too." A pause. "No, it's all going according to plan. The ring is worth at least $30,000, and you should see the apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor." Another pause. "His mother, don't worry about her. She's just a retired schoolteacher from some small town. No threat to us." I froze, unsure if I should make my presence known or retreat. Before I could decide, Cassandra continued. "Just a few more months, and we'll be set. The prenup might be tricky, but I'll figure something out. I always do." She laughed again. "Love you too. Gotta go before someone notices I'm gone." I slipped back down the hallway, my mind racing. Who had she been talking to? What plan was going according to schedule? And why would she need to figure something out regarding a prenuptial agreement? When I returned to the party, Cassandra was back by Michael's side, smiling adoringly as he toasted their future together. Looking at her now with the knowledge of that phone conversation, Her performance seemed so obvious. The calculated touches, the strategic laugh at all his jokes, the way she showcased him to her friends like a prize she'd won. The next morning, before driving back to Connecticut, I tried to share my concerns with Michael over breakfast while Cassandra was out for a run. "Honey, I know you're excited, but don't you think this is all happening very quickly? What do you really know about Cassandra's background?" Michael's expression hardened. "Mom, I know you're trying to look out for me, but I'm not a child anymore. Cassandra is private about her past because her parents were abusive. She's worked hard to build a new life for herself. I understand that, but marriage is serious. People should know fundamental things about each other before—" "We do know each other," he interrupted. "Better than you think. And frankly, Mom, your questions are making Cassandra uncomfortable. She already feels like you're judging her because she comes from money, and you've always been suspicious of wealthy people." This accusation stunned me into silence. I'd never expressed any such sentiment, and the irony was that I was beginning to doubt Cassandra came from money at all, given the inconsistencies in her story. As the wedding planning progressed, the distance between Michael and me grew. Our calls became shorter and less frequent. When we did speak, it was mostly him sharing details about wedding venues and costs that made my stomach clench with worry. The turning point came 3 months into their engagement, when Michael casually mentioned that Cassandra wanted a prenuptial agreement. "To protect her family assets," he explained. "Apparently there's a trust fund involved." This was the first I'd heard of any family wealth given Cassandra's earlier comments about her parents not being in the picture. The inconsistency combined with the overheard phone call cemented my decision to look deeper into Cassandra's background. That evening, I began with basic social media searches, something I should have done months earlier. Cassandra's Instagram account only went back 2 years with no photos older than her apparent arrival in Boston. There were no family pictures, no childhood memories, no college friends. Expanding my search, I tried different variations of her name, Cassandra Taylor as Michael had introduced her. Nothing substantial appeared until I tried image searches and found something that stopped me cold. There on the 3rd page of results was a wedding announcement from a Houston Society page dated just 2 years earlier. The photo showed Cassandra unmistakably in a wedding gown beside a handsome man identified as businessman Anthony Martinez. The caption read, "Anthony and Cassandra Martinez celebrate their nuptials at the Houston Country Club." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Either Cassandra had been married before and had hidden this fact from Michael, or worse, she was still married and engaging in outright fraud. With shaking hands, I saved the image and continued searching, now using Cassandra Martinez as my search term. More results appeared: charity galas in Houston, a few business events where she accompanied Anthony, all dated within the past 3 years. What I couldn't determine from my amateur sleuthing was whether they had divorced. I needed help from someone with access to records I couldn't easily obtain as a retired schoolteacher with basic internet skills, and I knew exactly who to call. Janet Willis had been my student nearly 30 years ago, a bright, inquisitive girl who grew up to become a private investigator with her own small firm in Hartford. She was the daughter of my friend Sarah from my single mother's support network, and we had maintained a connection throughout the years. "This is quite a situation, Mrs. Henderson," Janet said after I explained my concerns over coffee at her office. "You realize that if you're wrong about this, your son may never forgive you for investigating his fiancée. And if I'm right and do nothing, he could marry a woman who's already married to someone else," I replied. "I have to know the truth, Janet." Janet agreed to take the case, and I provided her with all the information I had gathered so far. She warned me it might take a week or two to compile a thorough background check, especially if Cassandra had been using different names. Those 2 weeks were among the longest of my life. I maintained normal communication with Michael, fighting the urge to voice my suspicions without concrete evidence. Every time he mentioned wedding plans or Cassandra's name, I had to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out my concerns. When Janet finally called to schedule a meeting, The gravity in her voice told me she had found something significant. I think you should come to my office, Mrs. Henderson. This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone. The manila folder Janet placed before me contained documentation that confirmed my worst fears and revealed even more troubling information than I had anticipated. Cassandra Taylor is indeed Cassandra Martinez, and she is still legally married to Anthony Martinez, a real estate developer from Houston, Janet explained, pointing to marriage records and recent tax filings. There's no record of divorce proceedings or even a legal separation. But that wasn't all. Janet had uncovered a pattern of behavior that suggested Cassandra was a practiced con artist. Before she was Cassandra Martinez, she was Cassandra Whitfield, married to Gregory Whitfield from 2015 to 2019. That marriage ended in divorce after she allegedly emptied their joint accounts and disappeared for several months. Before that, she operated under the name Cassandra Reynolds in Chicago, where she was involved in a series of short-term relationships with wealthy men who later reported missing funds or valuable items. Janet showed me police reports, court documents, and financial records painting a picture of a woman who systematically targeted men of means, established relationships, quickly gained access to their finances, and then moved on to the next target. And here's the most concerning part. Janet continued showing me bank records she had legally obtained. Anthony Martinez has filed police reports claiming Cassandra has systematically withdrawn nearly $200,000 from their joint accounts over the past 6 months, coinciding exactly with the timeline of her relationship with your son. I felt physically ill looking at the evidence before me. This wasn't just about Cassandra lying about her past or even about her current marital status. She was actively defrauding both Anthony and Michael simultaneously. What do I do with this information? I asked Janet, my voice barely above a whisper. Legally, you have no obligation to report this to anyone, Janet advised. But as Michael's mother, you might want to consider confronting Cassandra directly and giving her the opportunity to come clean to Michael herself. That way, it's not you telling him, it's her admitting the truth. This seemed like the most reasonable approach. If Cassandra had any decency at all, she would end the engagement herself once she knew her deception had been discovered. I arranged to meet Cassandra at a quiet cafe in Boston while Michael was at work. She arrived looking immaculate as always, her suspicion barely concealed beneath a veneer of politeness. I appreciate you making time to see me, Cassandra, I began once we had ordered coffee. There's something important we need to discuss regarding your upcoming marriage to my son. If this is another attempt to suggest we're moving too quickly, Lottie, I assure you, it's about Anthony Martinez, I interrupted, placing a copy of their wedding photo on the table between us. The change in her expression was immediate and chilling. The charming mask dropped, completely replaced by a cold calculation I had never seen before. Where did you get this? She asked, her voice flat. That's not important. What matters is that you're still legally married to Anthony while planning to marry my son. That's bigamy, Cassandra. It's a crime. I placed more documents on the table, copies of the tax returns, bank statements, showing the withdrawals, the pattern of previous relationships, and financial irregularities Janet had uncovered. You have two choices, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite my racing heart. You can tell Michael the truth yourself and end this charade, or I will show him everything. What I hadn't expected was Cassandra's response. Rather than showing remorse or panic, she leaned back in her chair with an almost amused expression. Go ahead and tell him, she said with a slight shrug. Who do you think he'll believe? The mother who's been jealous of our relationship from the start? The lonely widow who can't stand to see her precious son building a life with someone else? Or the woman he's madly in love with who's been warning him that his mother might try something like this out of desperation? She gathered the documents and handed them back to me. Michael already thinks you resent me because I come from a different social background. If you show him these, I'll tell him you fabricated everything because you can't accept that he's moving on from being your little boy. I'll tell him you've become obsessed and need psychological help. Her eyes narrowed. By the time I'm done, he'll cut you out of his life completely. Is that what you want, Lottie? Before I could respond, she stood and collected her designer handbag. Stay out of our lives, and maybe, just maybe, I'll make sure you get an invitation to visit your grandchildren someday. With that parting threat, she walked out of the cafe, leaving me stunned and devastated. I sat there for nearly an hour turning over my options. Cassandra had correctly identified my greatest fear, losing Michael completely. But could I really stay silent, knowing what I knew? Could I stand by and watch my son legally bind himself to a woman who was not only already married, but who had a history of defrauding her partners? The answer, I finally realized, had to be no. Even if Michael hated me for it, I had to try to protect him one last time. The fallout came swiftly. The day after my meeting with Cassandra, Michael called me, his voice shaking with anger. "How could you, Mom? How could you hire a private investigator to dig into Cassandra's past? Do you have any idea how violated she feels?" My heart sank. "Michael, please listen." "No, you listen." He cut me off. "Cassandra told me everything. How you've been questioning her friends, how you confronted her with some ridiculous story about her being married to someone else, how you threatened to ruin our wedding if she didn't break up with me." Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Cassandra had twisted everything, painting herself as the victim and me as an unhinged, interfering mother. "That's not what happened," I tried to explain. "I did hire an investigator, but only because I overheard something concerning. And I have proof that Cassandra is..." "Proof? You mean those fake documents you showed her, Mom? Cassandra warned me you might try something like this. Her ex-boyfriend was abusive and has been spreading lies about her for years. She thought you might fall for it if he contacted you." The level of manipulation was breathtaking. Cassandra had not only preemptively discredited any evidence I might present, but had created an entirely fictional abusive ex to explain away any uncomfortable truths that might surface. "Michael, please, if you would just look at what I found." "I don't want to see your evidence," he said, the quotation marks audible in his tone. "Cassandra and I discussed it, and we think it's best if you don't attend the wedding. You've made it clear you don't support our relationship, and your presence would only create tension on what should be the happiest day of our lives." I felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath me. "You're uninviting me from your wedding." "It's for the best, Mom. Maybe after we're married and you've had time to accept our relationship, we can work on rebuilding trust. But for now, I think we need some distance." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the pictures of Michael through the years: his first day of school, his high school graduation, his college commencement. I had been there for every important moment of his life, and now for perhaps the most significant one, I was being pushed aside based on lies. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to reach Michael, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I sent emails with attachments of the most damning evidence Janet had found, but they went unanswered. I even drove to Boston and waited outside his office building, but he spotted me from the lobby and turned around, disappearing back inside rather than facing me. Meanwhile, Janet continued her investigation, uncovering more details about Cassandra's past and her current activities. The most significant development came when Janet located Anthony Martinez, who was actively searching for Cassandra. "He doesn't know she's planning to marry someone else," Janet explained during our update meeting. "He believes she's temporarily staying with a sick friend in Boston while they work through some marital issues. He's been trying to reach her for weeks." The wedding was now just 2 weeks away. With all my direct approaches to Michael failing, I made the difficult decision to contact Anthony Martinez directly. If Michael wouldn't believe me, perhaps hearing from Cassandra's legal husband would finally break through the fog of manipulation surrounding him. Janet arranged a secure call with Anthony, who was initially suspicious of my motives, but became increasingly distressed as I shared what I knew about Cassandra's relationship with my son. "We never separated," Anthony confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Cassandra told me she needed space after a fight we had about starting a family. She said she was staying with a college friend in Boston while we both cooled off." I had no idea she was. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Mr. Martinez, my son is planning to marry Cassandra in 2 weeks, I said. He doesn't believe me when I try to tell him the truth. Would you be willing to speak with him directly? Anthony agreed immediately, but when we attempted to arrange a meeting or call with Michael, we hit the same wall of silence I had been facing. Michael had effectively cut off all communication with me and was screening his calls. There's only one option left, Anthony said during one of our planning calls. If we can't reach him beforehand, we'll have to attend the wedding itself. It's the only way to make sure he sees the truth before it's too late. The idea of crashing my son's wedding, a wedding I had been explicitly uninvited from, felt like a violation of boundaries I had always respected throughout Michael's adult life. But weighing that against allowing him to commit bigamy and tie himself legally and financially to a woman who was actively defrauding him, I reluctantly agreed. Janet helped us prepare, gathering all the documentation we would need: Anthony and Cassandra's marriage certificate, recent financial records showing their joint accounts, photos of them together dated after she had begun her relationship with Michael, and police reports Anthony had filed regarding the missing funds. 2 days before the wedding, Anthony flew to Boston, and we met in person for the first time at my hotel. He was a distinguished-looking man in his early 40s, with the kind of confidence that came from genuine success rather than Cassandra's carefully constructed facade. I keep asking myself how I didn't see it, he said as we compared notes over dinner. All the signs were there: her vague past, the friends who never seemed to know her, before I did the expensive tastes that seemed excessive even for someone used to luxury. She's very convincing, I replied, finding unexpected comfort in connecting with someone else who had been deceived. And when you love someone, you want to believe the best about them. We spent hours planning our approach. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at an exclusive venue in Cape Cod. Janet had managed to obtain the exact timeline of events through a contact at the venue. The ceremony would begin at 4 o'clock with the traditional "speak now" or "forever hold your peace" moment occurring approximately 20 minutes later. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I kept picturing Michael's face when he saw me. The anger, the betrayal, the potential permanent damage to our relationship. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the alternative: my son legally binding himself to a woman who was already married, who had systematically drained funds from her current husband, and who had isolated Michael from the person who loved him most. By morning, my resolve had solidified. Whatever happened, I had to try one last time to protect my son, even if he couldn't yet see that he needed protection. The Ocean View Resort on Cape Cod was as picturesque as its name suggested, with manicured gardens leading down to a private beach where white chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing the water. Anthony and I arrived separately, parking in the public lot rather than the designated wedding parking to avoid early detection. We had agreed to enter the ceremony area separately as well, hoping to blend in with late arriving guests. I wore a simple blue dress, understated but appropriate for a wedding, and large sunglasses to partially obscure my face. Anthony was in a sharp suit that helped him blend with the other well-dressed guests. "Are you ready for this?" Anthony asked quietly, as we met briefly at the edge of the property out of sight of the main entrance. I took a deep breath and nodded. "No, but we're doing it anyway." We timed our approach to coincide with the seating of the last guests, when the ushers would be busy and the attention would be on the impending start of the ceremony. I slipped into the back row on the bride's side, while Anthony positioned himself near an exit on the groom's side, giving us different vantage points. The string quartet began playing Canon in D, signaling the start of the procession. My heart ached, watching Michael at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, his face alight with happiness and anticipation. He believed he was about to marry the woman of his dreams, not knowing she was perpetrating a massive fraud. Then Cassandra appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant, in an elaborate designer gown that must have cost thousands. The guests rose as she began her procession, escorted by an older man I didn't recognize, likely a stand-in she had hired to play the role of father, given her claims of having no family. The ceremony proceeded with the traditional readings and vows. I sat rigidly in my seat, heart pounding so loudly I was certain the people around me must hear it. When the officiant finally reached the critical moment, asking if anyone knew any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, Anthony and I exchanged a glance across the aisle. Anthony stood first. "I do," he said, his voice clear and confident. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. Cassandra, who had been facing Michael with a practiced look of adoration, froze completely. "Who are you, sir?" the officiant asked, clearly flustered by the interruption. Anthony moved forward toward the altar. "My name is Anthony Martinez, and I object to this marriage because the bride, Cassandra Martinez, is already married to me." Another wave of whispers and exclamations swept through the crowd. Michael looked bewildered, glancing between Anthony and Cassandra, whose face had drained of color. "That's ridiculous." She finally managed, her voice higher than normal. "I don't know this man." Taking my cue, I stood as well and moved toward the altar from my side. "Michael, honey, I'm so sorry to do this, but it's true." Michael's eyes widened in shock when he saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here? You were asked not to come." "I know, and I wouldn't have interfered if it wasn't absolutely necessary," I said, approaching slowly. "But Cassandra is not who she claims to be." Anthony removed documents from his inside jacket pocket. "We have our marriage certificate dated 2 years ago in Houston. We have joint tax returns from last year. We have photos of us together from just 4 months ago when she claimed to be visiting a sick friend in Boston, but was actually beginning her relationship with Michael." Cassandra's composure cracked completely. "He's lying. He's my ex-husband who has been stalking me. I told you about him, Michael, the abusive one who can't let go." "Then explain this," Anthony said, producing bank statements. "These are withdrawals from our joint account, nearly $200,000 Viz over the past 6 months, all made while you were supposedly no longer with me." Michael stared at the documents, then at Cassandra, confusion and the dawning of terrible realization crossing his face. "Cassandra," he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "What is he talking about?" I stepped closer, heartbreaking for my son, even as I knew this intervention was necessary. "Michael, I tried to tell you. This is why I hired the investigator. Cassandra is still legally married to Anthony. She's been maintaining relationships with both of you simultaneously, and she's been systematically withdrawing funds from their joint accounts during the same period she's been with you." The wedding guests were witnessing the scene with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and the undeniable fascination that comes with unexpected drama. Cassandra's carefully selected friends shifted uncomfortably, many avoiding eye contact, likely aware at least partially of her deceptions. "This is absurd." Cassandra attempted one last time, turning to Michael and grabbing his hands. "Baby, they're trying to ruin our special day. Your mother has never approved of me, and now she's brought some stranger to make up these horrible lies." But the evidence was overwhelming, and Michael's expression showed that doubt had firmly taken root. "If he's a stranger, how do you know he's the abusive ex you told me about?" he asked quietly. "You just said you don't know him." Caught in her own contradiction, Cassandra faltered. Anthony seized the opportunity to present their wedding photo, the same one that had initially alerted me to the truth. "This was taken 2 years ago at our wedding," he said, passing the photo to Michael. "We never divorced. There was never any abuse. We had an argument about starting a family, and she said she needed space. The next thing I knew, she was emptying our accounts and ignoring my calls, except to tell me she was staying with a friend while thinking things through." Michael stared at the photo, then at Cassandra. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Are you still married to him?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Cassandra's expression shifted from faux victimhood to cold anger in an instant. "You pathetic mama's boy," she spat at Michael, dropping all pretense of affection. "You think I actually wanted to spend my life with someone who calls his mother 3 times a week and consults her about everything? You were a mark, Michael. A good one, successful, trusting, desperate for love, but still just a mark." The cruelty of her words cut through the venue like a knife. Several guests audibly gasped. Michael stepped back as if physically struck. Security called the wedding planner who had materialized at the edge of the scene. Please escort these people out. That won't be necessary, Anthony replied calmly. I'm not leaving without my wife, with whom I have legal financial entanglements that need resolution, and I believe the police would be more appropriate than security at this point, given the nature of the fraud that's been perpetrated. At the mention of police, Cassandra's demeanor changed again. She glanced around, clearly calculating her options. In a swift movement, she gathered her elaborate skirts and pushed past the officiant, heading toward a side exit. Two of Anthony's friends, who I later learned were off-duty police officers he had brought along anticipating this very scenario, stepped forward to block her path. Miss Martinez, one of them said, I think it would be best if you remained here until this situation is sorted out. As the wedding descended into chaos, with guests beginning to leave and the wedding planner frantically trying to maintain some semblance of order, I moved to Michael's side. He stood motionless, still processing the public destruction of what he had believed was his future. I am so sorry, honey, I said softly. I tried to tell you privately. I never wanted it to happen this way. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and the beginning stages of grief. How did you know? How did you figure it out when I didn't see any of it? It started with a phone call I overheard at your engagement party, I explained. Something felt wrong, so I started looking deeper. Then I found their wedding announcement online and contacted Janet to help investigate further. Michael nodded slowly. The investigator I accused you of hiring maliciously. Yes, I confirmed gently. Everything she told you, I did the investigation, the confrontation was true, but her explanation of my motives was a complete fabrication. As we spoke, Anthony was on the phone with actual police reporting the financial fraud, while his friends ensured Cassandra didn't leave. The wedding guests had mostly dispersed, leaving an awkward collection of immediate family members, and the wedding party unsure of what to do next. Michael looked over at Cassandra, who was now seated surrounded by Anthony's friends, her wedding gown billowing around her like an absurd counterpoint to the grim reality of the situation. I really thought she loved me, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I know you did. I replied, resisting the urge to pull him into my arms as I had when he was a child with a skinned knee or broken toy. This was an adult hurt one that needed space and dignity to process. And I'm so sorry she wasn't who she pretended to be. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, awkward explanations to remaining family members, and the painful process of officially canceling a wedding that had already been derailed in the most dramatic way possible. Through it all, I stayed close to Michael, offering support without overstepping. When the police finally allowed us to leave, having taken preliminary statements and arranged for Cassandra to be questioned further regarding the financial fraud allegations, Michael turned to me in the parking lot. Would you mind staying in town tonight? I don't think I should be alone. Of course, I replied, relief washing over me, that despite everything he still wanted me near. Whatever you need. The months following what Michael grimly referred to as the wedding that wasn't were difficult but ultimately healing. Initially, he struggled with embarrassment, fielding concerned calls from friends and returning engagement gifts with brief, awkward notes of explanation. I keep thinking I should have seen it, he told me during one of our long conversations at his apartment where I had stayed for several days after the incident. There were so many red flags. Love can be blinding, I replied, and Cassandra was skilled at manipulation. She'd clearly done this before. But you saw through her, he pointed out. I smiled sadly. I had something you didn't: objectivity. When you're in love, you see what you want to see. From the outside, it's sometimes easier to spot the inconsistencies. As the weeks passed, Michael began to process his anger, not just at Cassandra for her deception, but also at himself for being so thoroughly fooled, and initially at me for how I had intervened. I wish you had found another way to tell me, he admitted during a weekend visit to my home in Connecticut. Walking into the ceremony like that was so public, so humiliating. I tried everything else first, I reminded him gently. You wouldn't take my calls, read my emails, or meet with me. What would you have done in my position knowing what I knew? He considered this for a long moment before nodding. Probably exactly what you did. I'm sorry I shut you out when you were trying to protect me. That conversation marked a turning point in our healing process. Michael began to rebuild his life, focusing on his career and reconnecting with the friends he had neglected during his whirlwind relationship with Cassandra. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Cassandra moved forward. Anthony filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment and financial fraud. The police investigation revealed that Michael wasn't the first man she had targeted while still married to Anthony, though he was the only one she had gone so far as to plan a wedding with. She's facing felony charges, Anthony told us during one of our occasional update calls. The prosecutor has evidence of similar schemes dating back nearly a decade under different names. For my part, I found unexpected support through a specialized group for parents whose adult children had been victimized by romantic scams. The stories shared in those meetings helped me realize that what had happened to Michael was far more common than I had imagined, and that the shame and self-recrimination he experienced were normal parts of the recovery process. 6 months after the wedding debacle, Michael suggested we meet Anthony for dinner during his next business trip to Boston. The meal was surprisingly comfortable, 3 people connected by an unfortunate experience, but finding solidarity in having exposed the truth. I've been meaning to thank you properly, Michael told Anthony as we finished our desserts. If you hadn't been willing to show up that day, I would be legally entangled with Cassandra right now. Anthony smiled ruefully. I'm just grateful your mother was persistent enough to find me. Cassandra would have continued draining my accounts while building a new life with you. We both dodged a bullet in different ways. As we said our goodbyes outside the restaurant, I was struck by how this painful chapter had created unexpected connections and ultimately growth. Michael and I had emerged with a stronger, more honest relationship than before. He had learned a harsh but valuable lesson about trusting his instincts and the people who truly loved him. And I had discovered that my role as a mother continued to evolve, even as Michael moved through his adult life. 1 year after the non-wedding, Michael called me with news that made my heart sing. He had started dating again, this time with a woman he had known casually for years through work. Their relationship was progressing slowly, thoughtfully, with open communication and none of the whirlwind intensity that had characterized his time with Cassandra. I want you to meet her, he said. Not just a quick dinner, but really spend time together. Your opinion matters to me. I'd love that, I replied, touched by his words. And Mom, thank you for having the courage to do what you did. I know it wasn't easy and I wasn't exactly grateful at the time. But you saved me from making a terrible mistake. That's what mothers do, I told him simply. We protect our children even when they're grown, even when it's difficult, even when they might hate us for it. I could never hate you, he assured me. I understand now that everything you did came from love. As I reflect on our journey through this ordeal, I'm reminded that a mother's intuition is a powerful force, one worth listening to, even when it leads to uncomfortable truths. Sometimes protecting those we love means taking difficult stands and risking relationships for the greater good. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to speak truth, even when it might not be welcomed. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of family resilience and truth. Remember to share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest decisions are the most important ones we make. Thank you for listening, and remember, trust your intuition. It might just save someone you love from heartbreak.